So you're new to playing caster DPS in Final Fantasy XIV. Honestly, all 3 of the casting jobs are pretty amazing options for you to bring to the party. And yes, I said 3. Sorry Blue Mages, you're not going to be in this video. However, you might be a bit concerned about how to play them. You might be used to roles that don't have that many cast times, like tank, melee, or ranged physical. Well, in this video, I'm going to give you some basic tips to help you get started. Now, in my opinion, the casting role is incredibly varied, despite only having 3 options, so you're probably going to want to do some research on each of them to determine which ones you want to try. My Versus series on the caster DPS, while definitely biased, covers them in much more detail than I would here. Consider checking that video out, or read through some of the guides on the balance. It's a Discord group full of people who write guides for players looking to learn. Once you've made your choice, get comfortable with your role actions. This is something you should do on any role if you're playing it for the first time. Swiftcast lets you instantly cast a spell, simple as that. You can combine this with your resurrection spells on Red Mage and Summoner to instantly bring teammates back from a KO, or for an additional movement option. Since Black Mage has no resurrections, you can even use it for increased movement or in specific spell rotations to squeeze in one last damaging spell. Surecast prevents knockbacks and prevents spells from being interrupted. You're definitely going to want to use this when bosses are attempting to knock you back or draw you in, so you can just continue casting, and sometimes that's going to be a matter of life or death. Lucid Dreaming restores your MP over time. Summoners and Red Mages should be using this very frequently, as it is one of their main sources of restoring MP in a fight. Black Mage has special rules with their mana, so it's much less useful for them, but there's some really high skill ways of utilizing it still. Finally, Addle. This reduces an enemy's intelligence and mind, meaning all their magic damage and guess their healing is reduced. This is a very popular tool for reducing damage from bosses, especially magical attacks that hit the entire party. There's no in-game way to tell if an attack is physical or magical, so if an attack looks magic-y, I guess, assume that Addle works and throw it out there to help reduce the damage of big room-wide attacks. Honestly, as someone new to the caster role, the biggest thing you need to know is how to cast uninterrupted. When you're brand new, you'll probably find that you often just cancel whatever you're doing to dodge attacks, and that means that you may not cast spells for a few seconds. Early on, when you're first leveling, you don't have a lot of tools, so that's pretty normal. But as you gradually advance through the game and try to break your own skill ceiling, you want to limit the amount of times this happens, so you're always dealing damage to the opponent. Fortunately, every mage has some tools for helping with this. I'll start with Summoner because it's easily the most mobile of the 3 mages. It's got instant cast Eggy Assault, which then give you access to Ruin 4, which is another instant cast spell. If both of these fail, you can just use Ruin 2, which is better than casting nothing at all and may be necessary at certain times. You also have Dreadworm Trance and Firebird Trance, and both of these allow you to spam DPS skills without casting, and all this comes together to make summoners hilariously mobile. Now that's not to say that doesn't take any skill to understand. They do use these tools in their normal rotation, sometimes in ways that prevent you from saving them for movement. Summoner mastery comes from understanding when you should save a few instant cast spells to move, or even thinking about when your trances might line up with long movement phases to allow you to constantly move while doing mechanics. Once you get the hang of it, you'll laugh at the other people who are flailing around in your party. On the flip side, Red Mage is a bit more complicated. I think a bit more complicated than people think at that. Every other spell Red Mage casts will be instant thanks to their dual cast trait, giving them a decent amount of short-term movement. Every other spell they can move for, 2 to 2.5 seconds uninterrupted. You want to try to weave movement between spells to proactively get to places where you'll need to dodge attacks. If you need lots of movement back to back, where you are in your rotation can actually be a big help. Your melee combo and its finishers are all instant, meaning you have some movement available during your burst, even if some of it requires you to be in melee range. Enchanted Reprise lets you move for a small gauge cost, which, as long as you don't use it too much, can still be quite effective, and Swiftcast can give you a GCD's worth of time to move as well, assuming you don't need to save it for a res. You can also use your Gap Closer and Backflip to get around, whether it just be to reposition or even deliberately timing them with your big damage so that it lines up with boss mechanics. This takes some mastery of the job and the encounters, but you'll probably find it much easier to approach fights and fight movement on Red Mage, at least at a basic level. Just don't accidentally use Sprint when you already have a dual cast proc. Much to my annoyance, it will actually consume your dual cast, and that can mess you up pretty bad. Finally, we have Black Mage, which is actually a pretty mobile mage, despite what people might tell you, but it requires a great deal of fight knowledge to move effectively. I mean, they have triple cast, which is basically like 3 swift casts back to back. They have Swiftcast itself. They have instant cast procs on a couple of spells. They have Xenoglossy, which is a free instant cast every 30 seconds, and they can even teleport to allies or their ley lines at the drop of a dime. These tools are amazing for movement, but they're all also just part of DPSing on the job normally. So it becomes a lot about knowing when you can just use these things to dish out damage, or whether you need to consider utilizing them for movement in the next few seconds. Mastering these tools comes with constant practice, but once you really get used to it, it'll feel like nothing can stop you from casting spells. Black Mage also has to use some tools to maintain resources while they're moving for mechanics when there's no boss available, so that's another thing you have to consider on the job. With a lot of the job-specific stuff done, I just have a couple more tips to give you, regardless of which caster you're playing, so just some general caster advice. Another very useful tool for movement is actually a special technique called slide casting. Now, we all play with a bit of ping to the game servers, some of us more or less than others, and you can actually abuse that to start moving near the end of a cast bar to just get a bit more movement. You won't move more than a couple of steps, but if you do this several spells back to back to get into position ahead of time, it can really help a lot. This technique is a little less prevalent depending on which mage you're actually playing. Summoner has a ton of instant casts, but they can still use it when they need to ruin 3 spam. And Red Mage, while they do have their dual cast, you can even do it before, on the first cast before you proc it, to get that little bit more distance. However, on healers and Black Mage, it's definitely a lot more prevalent. It's just a great technique to master all the same, even on jobs that aren't necessarily casters, like Samurai with their Madares or things like that. And finally, listen. I know you're a ranged DPS. You might be focused on casting, but unless you have a defensive tool available, or you're communicating with your healers that you're going to do something a specific way, try not to be in the middle of nowhere when you're playing ranged jobs. Healers often concentrate their heals towards the center of the room, or at least near the majority of the party, so standing along the edge of the arena is something that requires special attention, not just something you do because you don't have to be in melee range. Keep an eye out for things like healing bubbles or defensive tools from your team. Oh, and not to mention, if you're looking for a more damage-oriented reason to get close to your team, if you're too far away, you might not hit teammates with your buffs like Devotion or Embolden, or you might not get hit by theirs, meaning you just will deal less damage than you would have. So it's definitely a big tip for all ranged players. Overall, caster DPS is a lot about the individual job tools and less about some overall rule like some of the other roles are. They all play so differently that you're gonna have to get a feel for them, and honestly, I kinda like all of them in the state that they are right now. Really excited to see how they turn out in Endwalker, and hopefully they don't mess up the mobility on any of them in the process. And with that, that's going to be a wrap for my guide to new caster DPS. A shorter video, but one that gives you hopefully the information you'll need. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. And if you ever have any questions about stuff like that, hit up my Twitch live stream. I stream every day from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific, and you can always ask questions in the comment section below as well. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next one, and until then, take care.